peace, peace. In our last class, we began to make acquaintance with our guides, our teachers in the study and practice of Dharma. We heard that according to Vedanta, in matters that are beyond the grasp of our five senses, in matters that we can't see, we can't hear, we can't feel through our senses, the Veda or Shruti is our main guide. That is our primary authority. And Veda, as knowledge of God, I don't mean the books here, but to the knowledge as such of God. That is eternal and infinite. And portions of this vast divine knowledge were revealed to the rishis, the seers, or one could say the rishis discovered portions of that knowledge. And the record of these portions is what we know as the Vedas, the books. Then we learned about the different ways these Vedic texts were classified. There are three ways in which the Vedas are classified. One is as Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Vedas. And each of these Vedas is in turn divided into four, or it is more accurate to say that each of these books consists of four parts: Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. Samhitas are mantras, they are prayers and hymns addressed to the gods. And the brahmacharis or students, they learn it. The Brahmana portion contains elaborate and detailed instructions about the performance of rituals, yajnas, and these are meant for the householders. The Aranyakas contain upasanas or meditations. These were mainly meant for people who had retired from the householder's life into the forest, where elaborate methods of worship were not possible. And, excuse me, there seems to be some technical snag. We'll be back with you in a moment. Gita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. These Aranyakas were meant for those who had completed their householder stage of life and retired into the forest, where it was not possible for them to perform all these elaborate rituals and ceremonies. So for them, worship was raised to the mental level. From outside, it was brought inside. And these mental worship or contemplation is called upasanas, and they are contained in the Aranyakas. And the last classification, that is the Upanishad, they contain the pure knowledge of Brahman, or the ultimate reality, which was meant for all renouncing monks. Then the third kind of classification of the Vedas is according to their subject matter. This is the most general kind of classification. It is called Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. Work portion and the knowledge portion. The Karma Kanda is meant for those who seek material prosperity, happiness on the relative plane. It is called Abhyudaya. But the Jnana Kanda is meant for those who have seen through all this material prosperity and want something higher. They are the seekers of what is called the ultimate good or Nishreyasa, the supreme good. So the Vedas or Shruti are knowledge of God which is heard and orally communicated. That is why it is called Shruti, which is orally communicated from the beginning. And these are our principal or basic scriptures. But then they are by no means the only scriptures. We also have other guides in our spiritual journey. Secondary authorities. They are called auxiliary scriptures based on the. That is to say, they are human made, not God made. Now, the Vedas are mostly abstract and quite difficult to understand. If their teachings were to be understood by the common people, then they had to be popularized. That is to say, they had to be simplified, expanded, and illustrated. So it was that alongside the Vedas, a large body of writings gradually came into existence. And the one distinctive feature of all these scriptures is that while they address people at different levels of understanding, while they address the needs of changing times, they still remain utterly loyal to the eternal truths of the Vedas. That is their special characteristic. From there, they don't swerve. There are six different classes of these auxiliary scriptures. We already heard the names of them. Smritis, which are ethical and moral codes. Darshanas, schools of thought or schools of philosophy. Puranas are mythology. Itihasas, history and legend. Tantras, the Shakta scriptures. And lastly, the Agamas, the scriptures of the Vaishnavas and Shaivas. Smritis, if you remember, are scriptures that are remembered and handed down in writing by human authors. They are manuals of the Vedic way of life, which give the do's and don'ts of life, which prescribe certain things and prohibit certain others. But their main purpose is to gradually purify the mind and help a person progress towards perfection, step by step, gradually. And we also heard the names, two or three names of the most important ones, the Manusmriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, Parashara Smriti. These are the best known ones. And after the Smritis come the Darshanas, literally points of view from which truth is looked at. So these are viewpoints. Though in actual practice, they're nothing but schools of thought or philosophical schools. But the word means the word darshana. The word darshana means both school of thought and the book in which the school's doctrines are explained. It is just like the Veda. The word Veda it means primarily the knowledge of God, but its secondary meaning is the the books that contain this knowledge of God. In the same way, Darshana means a point of view, but the word also means a book in which the school's doctrines are set forth and explained. These are also 6 in number: Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. And each of them attempts to correlate, develop, and systematize the teachings of the entire Vedas. And because they are philosophical schools, their basic appeal is to a person's logical understanding. So, we had come up to this point in our last class. Now, the question is, these are all philosophical schools, but then are all of these equally authoritative? I said, history shows each darshana has had its day, each of them has enjoyed popularity at some time or other. But it is only Vedanta that still holds the field, because it is only Vedanta that has proved to be the most satisfactory system of philosophy. A complete philosophical system that could be developed directly out of the Upanishads, out of the Jnana Kanda, the knowledge portion of the Vedas. In the estimation of modern day scholars, Vaisheshika is not of much importance. But Nyaya and Sankhya are still popular among them, because Nyaya is a system of logic which is unavoidable in a philosophical school, and Sankhya is necessary for its system of cosmology and some of its other metaphysical theories. But even then, Nyaya and Sankhya are popular only as aids to the study of Vedanta. That is the purpose that they serve today. Mimamsa is for those who are interested in the ritual portion of the Vedas. But they say Mimamsa is also somewhat related to Hindu law. So those who research that field may find some interest in Mimamsa. But nowadays, by and large, it is only yoga and Vedanta that are accepted as the chief of the 6 schools. Yoga is, as you know, concerned with the practical side of philosophical and religious life. So it has a very devoted following. It is very faithfully studied by spiritual aspirants. But still, it is only Vedanta that all Hindus now accept as their living faith. You know, Vedanta doesn't always mean Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. Vedanta, in one or other of its various forms, there are about half a dozen forms: Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, Shuddha Advaita, Shuddhadvaita, Achintya Bheda Bheda, all these things. So Vedanta in any of its forms, that is what is now accepted as a Hindu's living faith. Now, there are several reasons why Vedanta is found more satisfactory than others. First, because it is able to give the most satisfactory answers to all the questions that that spiritual people are interested in. Questions regarding soul, God, the universe. They say Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara. Some basic questions regarding these matters. This is what spiritual people are very deeply interested in. These questions really bother them. And the second reason for Vedanta's popularity is because Vedanta makes a correct assessment, a right evaluation of the relative importance of the different parts of the Veda. We heard of the Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, Jnana Kanda, but it is Vedanta that assigns to each of them its proper place. That is one reason for its popularity. And the third one is because it rightly subordinates reason to revelation. You know, in philosophical studies, uh, for something to be accepted as a piece of valid knowledge, it has to pass three tests. And these are called Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Shabda. Pratyaksha is direct perception, Anumana is inference or deduction, and Shabda is Shastra, the Vedas. At first glance, it may appear to be unacceptable to subordinate reason to revelation. We human beings are so proud of our reasoning. In Vedanta, however, it is always so. Reason has to be subordinated to the Vedas, and that has a reason. Now, now, in the mechanism of human knowledge, in the process of knowledge, the two main components are perception and inference, pratyaksha and anumana. But these are of use only in understanding this world of time and space, this world of relativity. But in order to understand the nature of God or the ultimate reality, which is beyond the senses and the mind, sense perception and reasoning based on that, these have to be supplemented with something more, something higher. And that is Vedic testimony. The word used is testimony. Testimony means a formal statement saying what one knows to be true. So when the Vedas say this is the truth, and that fact is beyond the realm of our mind and senses, then the Veda has to be accepted. So according to Hindu philosophers, any conclusion regarding a spiritual truth depends for its validity on these three factors: scripture, shastra, or first is the scripture, then is inference, anumana, which is reasoning, and the last one is perception, personal experience, pratyaksha. It sounds strange. Normally, we would begin with the personal experience and end with scriptural evidence, only as a matter of corroborating our own experience. But in matters of religion, though, it has to be the other way around because, as we heard right at the beginning, and even in our last class, our spiritual experience is either non existent or very, very, very imperfect. So, an aspirant, with the help of a qualified teacher, should first study the scriptures. After all, the scriptures are nothing but records of the spiritual experiences of past years of truth. then the instruction thus received must be subjected to rigorous analysis, to reasoning. And finally, when one is convinced of the soundness of what one has studied, then one has to meditate on it and experience it for oneself in the depths of contemplation. That is where truth is experienced immediately without the interference of the mind. We see how careful and how thoroughgoing Vedanta teachers are when it comes to ascertaining what the nature of reality is. They leave no loopholes. They say neither the Veda nor reasoning nor experience can independently create genuine conviction. Not even the Vedas can do it. Because taken alone, taken by themselves, they often prove to be pitfalls. By depending solely upon scriptures, one can become dogmatic. By depending solely on reason, we can never be certain because reason cannot give certainty. All too often it is. We see in our day-to-day experiences also, very often it is nothing more than mere rationalization. We only prove what we want to prove. And personal experience by itself also can be deceptive because it can be just a projection of one's own favorite ideas. We see so many people going about claiming to have had spiritual experiences, but there is not an iota of spirituality to be seen in their lives. But when all these three factors, scripture, reasoning, and experience, when all three jointly lead to the same conclusion, then one may be reasonably assured of having reached the truth. So, it is mainly on account of its correct evaluation of the relative importance of these pramanas, of these factors in ascertaining knowledge, and also because of its correct assessment of the teaching of the Vedas. I mean, assigning their proper places to the Jnana Kanda, to the Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, and Jnana Kanda. It is because of this that Vedanta has superseded all the darshanas and still holds the field. But then, darshanas are philosophies, and naturally, they're not so easy to understand. They're only meant for the learned few. So, for the common people, the Hindu sages had another class of shastras. These shastras are called Puranas. The term Purana means belonging to ancient or olden times, a thing of the past, an event of the past, an ancient tale or legend. This is what the word Purana means. So these Puranas are long narratives which tell beautiful religious stories. Stories containing adventures of the gods and demons, fascinating tales of kings, legends, inspiring legends of saints, mystics. So all these they do to illustrate the truths of the Shruti or the Veda. They were the means employed by Hindu teachers for purposes of mass education. And through these Puranas, religion is taught in a very easy, interesting, and inspiring way. We have 18 Puranas in all. You may have heard of the Vishnu Purana and the Bhagavata Purana. These two happen to be the most popular of the 18. Obviously, most of these stories are imaginative, but some of them do have a historical basis, at least. We do get glimpses of India's ancient history through them. So we could call them historical tales in which facts and fiction are combined. It's a mixture. So what has happened now is, because of this character of the Puranas, because they are a mixture of fact and fiction, many modern people often tend to minimize their importance. Some even dismiss them outright as nonsense. But the point is, Hindu scriptures deal with ideal truth, not with historical truth. This is a very, very important point. The validity of the Puranas does not depend on any historical fact. In the Puranas, we have long graphic accounts of various avatars, incarnations of God. But history is not the point here. The purpose of the Puranas is only to give a representation. It could be an imaginative representation, but a representation of God's compassion for us. Their purpose is to depict how God has helped human beings at different stages of their evolution. For that matter, if I am a serious and sincere seeker of nothing else but spiritual illumination, then it matters little to me whether Krishna or Christ ever existed as historical personalities. It's enough. At least it is enough for me if it is possible for me to attain through Krishna or Christ the goal of my life, which is enlightenment, which is God realization or moksha. In his lecture on Christ, the messenger, Swami Vivekananda says something beautiful. I'll quote him in toto, and if you want, I can even repeat it because it is worth repeating. Swamiji says, we know the scholars, he's talking about the historicity of Christ. We know the scholars and their writings and the higher criticism. And we know all that has been done by study. We are not here to discuss how much of the New Testament is true. We are not here to discuss how much of that life is historical. It doesn't matter at all whether the New Testament was written within 500 years of history. Nor does it matter even how much of that life is true. But there is something behind it, something we want to imitate. To tell a lie, you have to imitate a truth. And that truth is a fact. You cannot imitate that which never existed. You cannot imitate that which you never perceived. This is very important to remember with reference to the Puranas. To tell a lie, you have to imitate a truth, and that truth is a fact. You can't imitate that which never existed. You can't imitate that which you never perceived. There must have been a nucleus, a tremendous power that came down, a marvelous manifestation of spiritual power, and of that we are speaking. It stands here. Therefore, we are not afraid of all the criticisms of the scholars. This is Swami Vivekananda on Christ. And that is the whole point of the Puranas. Krishna or Christ as historical figures have only a secondary importance. In fact, I just mentioned the Bhagavata. In spite of its being a Purana, so-called imagination, it is so important in its influence on India's religious imagination that it is placed on the same level as the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are both classed as Itihasas or history, as facts. That is the effect that the so-called imaginary stories have had on the spiritual lives of an entire country. Now that brings us to the Itihasas. What are they and what is their object? Just please excuse me, I'll have a drink of water. The term Itihasa literally means, it translates to a phrase. Iti ha asa means so it was indeed. So the Itihasas include legend, tradition, and history. They are traditional accounts of past events. Traditional accounts of past events means something which has definitely happened. So they are accepted as true records of the events that they narrate. These two Itihasas. And what are these two? They are the well-known epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And their purpose is to drive home to the popular mind, to the people at large, by means of historical stories, by means of legend, the same principles of the Shrutis, that and the laws of the Smritis, the principle of the Vedas and the moral laws and codes of the Smritis. These two are conveyed in a popular way through historical stories by the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. We find great character types in these books, and these character types have been established in the Hindu mind. They have established the Vedic religion in the Hindu consciousness. In fact, they are a sort of popular Veda. The Shruti, because of its elaborate rituals, I mean the Karma Kanda of the Shrutis, because of these elaborate and hard to follow, hard to perform rituals, and long courses of spiritual disciplines that the Jnana Kanda, on the other hand, prescribes. These two can only be for the chosen few, so to say. But the Puranas and the Itihasas, which are nothing but popular renderings of the same Vedic truths, the same ethical principles described in the Smritis, these are for everybody. Almost, it is a fact that almost every Hindu gets their earliest religious education, their earliest spiritual notions from the stories of this popular Veda, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. In a very real sense, Valmiki and Vyasa were respectively the authors of these two epics, are great nation builders, because Hindu society still follows the lines chalked out by them centuries upon centuries ago. So it is no exaggeration to say that the characters that Valmiki and Vyasa created in the Ramayana and Mahabharata are sometimes more real to people than people in actual life itself. You can really see this if you go to India. Rama, Sita, Hanuman, Lakshmana, the Pandava brothers, Krishna, these characters are much more real, taken much more seriously than the people we meet in our day-to-day interactions. You can even say that much. Rama is the central figure in the Ramayana. He is the ideal son, he is the ideal husband, he is the ideal father, ideal king. He is the ideal everything. He is called Ramo Vigrahavan Dharma. He is the very personification of Dharma. And for its part, the Mahabharata is actually an encyclopedia of Vedic Dharma itself. Mahabharata, as you may know, contains very long stories, long episodes, dialogues, discourses, and sermons. And Krishna dominates over the whole work. It is he who holds all the strings of action. And he is pictured as both a great teacher and a great man of action. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, he is God himself. And from the beginning, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata have exercised such a profound influence upon India. The legends which compose them, the national heroes who are celebrated in these two works, and the truths to which they give expression, all these have have provided the foundation pillars of Indian culture. They have supplied poets and dramatists. They have given theologians and thinkers, painters and sculptors. All of these people, the Ramayana and Mahabharata have given their principal themes. They are all inspired by the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Uh, uh, Men of literature, artists, thinkers, everybody has drawn inspiration and their principal themes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So, directly as well as indirectly, these two books have in fact permeated the entire national consciousness from the highest classes to the lowest. And every Hindu, whether they're educated or not so well educated, every Hindu has been familiar with them. Even during periods when literacy in India was at its lowest, even then. In fact, until very recently, in villages throughout India, in the quiet hours of evening when work was finished, people came together to listen eagerly to recitations from these books, recitations by specially trained storytellers. This was how the essential moral lessons of the great spiritual truths of this immemorial Vedic tradition were brought to the humblest cottage. So their effect upon the vast masses of Indian population is really tremendous. Because of these great itihasas, because of Ramayana and Mahabharata, even the lowest Indian peasant, the lowest laborer, though uneducated, is still, in a very deep sense, cultivated. They may not be so well informed about many things of this world, but they are spiritually quite knowledgeable. At least they know what is essential for a human being to know. They know that a human being ultimately has to renounce the vanity of all earthly things and start to seek shanti, peace. You must begin to practice dharma with a view to attaining the only worthwhile goal of human life, and that is God realization or moksha. This much they know, everybody. That is why some scholars have very rightly said that in order to understand the real India, the India beneath the superficiality, to understand the real India, one must first understand the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So much about the Itihasas. The next type of scriptures would be the Tantras and Agamas. But it is unthinkable when, for somebody who is trying to explain the Hindu Shastras, not to mention a work as important and as influential as the Bhagavad-Gita. That happens to be the most important and the most popular discourse on the Vedic religion, this Bhagavad-Gita. As you know, it is just a very small work, just a small work of 700 verses, embedded in one of the 18 long books of the Mahabharata. So Bhagavad Gita forms part of the Mahabharata. And I say Bhagavad Gita is small because it is only 700 verses compared to the 100,000 verses of the Mahabharata. You can now imagine the extent, the vastness of this Mahabharata. But still, even if it is just a fraction of that vastness, this Bhagavad Gita is so important, it is so great that one always has to give it special treatment. It reserves for itself a special section. And that importance is due both to its context and to its contents. Firstly, we know it occurs just before the historic war between the Pandavas and Kauravas, and the meeting place, the focal point was the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And the discourse between Krishna and Arjuna is placed at the very focus of this great epic, Mahabharata, at the critical moment when Arjuna sees his own people ranged against him. He loses heart and is tempted to abandon his duty as a royal, as a Kshatriya, whose duty it is to stand up for justice and protect virtue or dharma. Had he given in to that temptation and left the battlefield, had he done that, the war would have ended. It would have ended even before it began. But evil would have won. And that is just the calamity that Krishna averted. Krishna discusses with Arjuna the moral and metaphysical implications of all human duties. That is what he does. And in the process, he removes Arjuna's doubts and enables him to perform the task before him, to fulfill his duty as a Kshatriya dispassionately and fearlessly, depending on God Himself. This is the position every human being at one time or other in his career feels. We are all at one time or other faced with a dilemma as to what we ought to do, what is moral for us to do. And it is not always easy to do what our ethical sensibilities ask us to do. This is because Bhagavad-Gita addresses this problem so effectively and so conclusively. That is the first reason for its importance. Now, before I elaborate on the Gita, I see it is almost time. So I think I'll conclude today's topic here and take up this Bhagavad Gita next Saturday.